Going to go ahead and get started and let people trickle in to check out some of these very interesting distributed energy resources case studies. So we have three experts with us today who are going to take some time to give a short presentation of case studies they've been working on about the integration of distributed energy resources into the grid. On my left, we have Asim Hussain, Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience for Bloom Energy. Next to him, Vic Shao, CEO and founder of Green Charge Networks. And on my right, and first to present, we have Nelly Tong, consultant with DNVGL. So without further ado, let me introduce Nelly Tong. And please, Nelly, take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Well, the mic is pretty loud. So,
Nelly, before you begin, I'm sorry to interrupt. By the way, everyone, we will be taking questions on these case studies. And please submit as many questions as you can as the case studies roll out, because otherwise I'll be forced to ask questions and nobody wants that. Thank you.
Hi, again, I'm Nelly Tong. I'm from DNVGL. DNVGL is a global consultancy, energy services including testing and certification, as well as independent engineering and advanced analytics. So today I'm going to present to you two case studies that we've done under the contract of ARPA-E Charges program, under the program where we do battery testing, microgrid testing, as well as economics modeling. So some of these two case studies we'll do, I'll be presenting to you. The first one will be on self-supply of solar and storage. So self-supply, which is solar plus storage, is becoming more and more important. You've heard a little bit about the duck curve throughout the day. What you haven't heard much about is what we like to call the Loch Ness profile. Looks just like the duck, but this is how we like to describe internally how when a circuit has high penetration of PV, it creates this high ramp or fast ramp around late afternoon. Of course, that's creating a lot of grid problems that we think could be mitigated by storage. So we can see in places like Hawaii, net metering is being replaced by the tariff such that selling back to the grid is no longer allowed, and they're not compensated for. And in places like Nevada, the excess storage or excess energy from PV is actually compensated for in a much more reduced rate. So that makes it a lot more important for solar storage self-supply. And so we're looking at a case study like that, and this case study is based on tariffs in Hawaii. And this is going to be more important in California and New York as there are going to be more PV coming online, and where more circuits will have this Loch Ness profile with the high ramps in the mid to late afternoon. So the self-supply, solar self-supply control strategy is pretty simple. When the PV is larger than load, you charge up the battery. When the load is larger than the PV, the battery discharges. So the key question is, when do you actually need storage with your PV? And also, how big of this battery do you need? So here's an operational example of how it looks like. You see the blue curve there, that's the customer load unmitigated by solar or storage. The red curve is the solar, and the blue bars out there is utility to customer load. So as you can see here, from midday, from middle of the night to the morning before the solar comes on, there's a little bit of utility to grid energy. Once the solar ramps up, the solar is able to supply to the load, and the excess energy without storage will be basically dumped and curtailed. With storage, the storage will be charged up with the excess energy. So I don't know if so this part would be the part where the energy would be wasted if without the storage. So in the late afternoon, in the neck of the Loch Ness profile, you'll see that with the storage is able to supply the customer with the rest of the energy until midnight. Without storage, the customer will be paying for energy during this block. So for the system that we modeled a 6 kilowatt PV system with a 3.3 kilowatt storage, a 4-hour storage. That's pretty much a 2 Powerwall device. And so the comparison is without storage. In this case, in Hawaii, the customer will be curtailing almost 50% of the PV during this time period. With storage, they only would be curtailing about 7.5% of the PV. So now let's look at the economics of it. So what does it mean to a customer? And I should have labeled this, but the vertical line is the cost effectiveness. So the green line is PV standalone. When you look at the PV standalone, there's a diminishing benefits to a standalone PV because more and more PV is being curtailed. So up to the point of about 8 kilowatt, it is no longer cost effective to have a PV system in Hawaii standalone. However, if you include a 2 kilowatt or 2-hour or 4-hour storage, you'll be able to install a much larger or a slightly larger PV system. So, so for a 2-hour storage, you can install a 10 kilowatt system or a 13 kilowatt system if you pair it with storage. So I guess this is a maybe interesting point for some of you. I talked to some solar vendors yesterday. You understand that for install costs, the equipment cost has been coming down, but one of the more stubborn costs is customer acquisition. So if you can sell a system that's a lot larger, you don't have to find as many customers, and that will probably decrease some of the install cost overall. So this is the solar self-supply use case, and we've also done this. So we've done this case study for residential customers. We also did a similar study for commercial customers, and the benefits are a little bit more muted because the commercial customers have a load and generation profile that are not as variant. However, we did a second case study that's focused on commercial customers. So this is a combined application of demand-side management and wholesale participation. And specifically, we're looking at demand charge reduction for bill management for commercial customers and fast regulation in the PJM market for regulation. So I guess I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna go a little bit faster. But the control strategy here, I'm not gonna go into details. It's a lot more complicated. For customer bill management, we're prioritizing that application. And for all the extra capacity for the battery, we'll use it to commit to wholesale application for regulation. And one thing to note is that for storage, we make sure that it's charged during the day so we can take advantage of the investment tax credit, which is pretty important. So the storage has to be charged by the solar system. So here, how it looks in a secondary school. You can see here how it works is that during these hours, the storage has shaved off the peak. So the demand charge, that's the demand charge reduction part of it. And then you don't see this green curve that well, but the solar is also charging up the storage around this time. This is how it looks like in terms of the set points for the storage. With just demand charge management, it's a pretty flat set point around 0 for most of the day, except for about 5 or 6 hours in the middle of the day. That leaves the rest of the capacity available for performing regulation. And here's a curve for the set points for regulation, which is a lot more variant. And this is the economics of it. We're stacking up a lot of these benefits. For over a 24-hour period, the solar plus storage, having both applications, there's a energy savings of about $50, and from regulation, there's a benefit of about $20. One thing to note is that to have to stack the wholesale application regulation on top of the demand charge reduction, we actually increase the peak demand by a tiny bit over here. And that's because of some uncertainty in the forecast of generation and load. So, there's a slight increase of peak demand. However, when you stack up all the economics of it, it still pans out pretty well.
Interesting.
Go one slide over, if I can, which is probably the most interesting slide of this deck. So wait for it.
Can we move the slide forward, y'all? Hey. Nope.
Forward.
Forward 2.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. With just demand charge reduction, you can see that a solar plus storage system, the payback is pretty decent. It's between 16 to 23 years. However, when you stack it up with regulation provision, the payback period suddenly becomes a lot better. It gets down to 3 to 4 years. So I guess the lesson here is that you can stack applications, especially with these long duration applications like bill management, with these short duration power applications like regulation. We've also, and this is the same with PV smoothing, which works very well with stacking up with demand charge reduction as well. So that's the last of my slide. I have a few minutes left. I'm surprised.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Nelly, we have a couple questions here. I did want to ask real quick. What are the complexities of managing to keep demand charges in check, demand in check, while also keeping the battery available for frequency regulations? Are there any trade-offs there that are required? And how do you guys build the kind of software to manage which of those two activities are going to choose to do or prepare to do over the intervals throughout the day?
Yeah, it's actually pretty complicated to go through all the control theory and the algorithm for it. But first, we set aside a 30-minute of the storage, which in this case is a 2-hour storage. So we set aside 30 minutes just for regulation. And then we calculate the demand charge reduction using the rest of the hour and a half to figure out how much of the demand charge reduction we can provide. And after that, and that's based on forecasts of load and generation to optimize on a 15-minute basis how we can reduce the demand charge. And after that, the rest of the capacity that's available when we're not using the storage for demand charge reduction, we use it to commit to regulation. So basically, we're not co-optimizing these two things. We are prioritizing the demand charge reduction. And as you can see in the benefits that, that's where most of the savings come from.
Right.
And however, as you've seen in the previous slide, that when you stack these two applications, the frequency regulation will compromise the savings of the demand charge reduction by a tiny little bit, but not so much that it will deteriorate the cost benefit of these two applications stacked up.
Very interesting. And these do seem like pretty compelling, payback period improvements. I don't know if you know of whether or not DNV's kind of work in this area is being looked at by any of your clients or anything like that, just to get a sense of what you know of might be the interest out there in the commercial sphere of trying out this kind of application.
Yeah, I mean, whoever's interested, come talk to me afterwards. This project is sponsored by ARPA-E, so we're doing this under DOE funding. But we would love to do it for any clients out there who are interested in putting in these type of devices, using it for this type of applications.
Okay. We do have a question from the audience, kind of more generally. When will we see solar plus storage to be cost effective in California? I don't know if I might twist that general question into a more specific query about what you see as the applicability of the kind of research you guys are doing here about saying that maybe as frequency reserve markets get a little bit more lucrative in California, whether this might be something that people developing, demand charge reduction, solar storage projects in California might be looking at.
Right, so at least for the first application with the solar self-supply application, it works really well in Hawaii right now when the rates are really high and there's no net metering. We don't know what net metering will look like. Net metering 3.0 would look like. If it looks more like Hawaii, it will be a very compelling case for solar self-supply for residential customers. In terms of wholesale applications in California, I think there are pilot programs out there right now looking at how it actually works. And it's not just for regulation, but participating in energy markets as well.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you again, Nelly.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Great. Next up, we have Asim Hussain from Bloom Energy, and we'll be talking a little bit about the combination of fuel cells.
Sure. So I guess storage is going to be the hot topic up here this afternoon. So I'm with Bloom Energy. We make a distributed generation system utilizing solid oxide fuel cell technology. I'm going to go very, very quickly because I have to get through this in 10 minutes. So essentially, we're making reliable, sustainable, and very cost-effective power for our customers, generally focused on the C&I space. I do need you to understand a little bit about our architecture in order for me to explain how storage actually integrates with it. So we utilize fuel cells that are generating direct DC power, build those into modules, which are then built into systems. And essentially, we do that utilizing natural gas or biogas. And we do that essentially with a very, very high efficiency, the most efficient generation device on the planet, even compared to a CCGT or other type of gas plant. And we do that without combustion, very importantly. So we end up with electricity that's very clean, no particulate emissions of any kind. We can do both AC and DC power as an output, and a low carbon footprint. So typically 50% compared to the US grid, about 25% compared to the California grid in terms of CO2 reduction, and that reduction takes place 24 hours a day. So we deploy mostly with C&I customers. So since the topic is distributed energy future of California, 65% of the electricity is approximately utilized in California by C&I customers. All kinds of different customers, from the NHL teams to the Staples Center in terms of sports, but a lot of high-tech customers, anybody who uses a lot of electricity. So coming back to the architecture of the system, one of the fundamental aspects of our system is it functions on a parallel DC bus. So each fuel cell is taking in natural gas and ambient air and producing electricity at a steady rate without combustion. And when that happens, it puts all of the electricity back on a DC bus that then goes back and gets inverted in this AC module to AC power. So when you look at that architecture, there's always been talk about DC-based systems. And in generation, what's really great about DC-based systems, it's very easy to synchronize them versus AC systems in a microgrid format specifically. So what we're actually looking at doing is actually taking storage and putting it on that same DC bus behind the same set of inverters we already have, and deploying that solution such that now not only are we providing 24/7 firm power, but we're also providing an aspect of power that's dispatchable for the load curve of the specific customer. So in order to do that, we need a partner in terms of storage. So we announced at the end of last year a partnership with Southern Company, both from a financing standpoint for our end customers, because primarily our business provides power purchase agreements as well as lease and CapEx agreements, power purchase agreements being highly favored by customers for long-term commitments. So in that, PowerSecure is a fully owned subsidiary of Southern Company, and they provide behind-the-meter solutions, both from a load management standpoint as well as generation standpoint, as well as storage. So we also developed a partnership with PowerSecure as part of this transaction to integrate the Bloom Energy Server with storage. And initially, we'll be deploying 50 megawatts of fuel cells at 100+ locations through this partnership. And 60+ of those sites will actually have the integrated solution. So what does that actually look like? Well, it's going to be deployed at a number of Home Depot stores. Home Depot is going to be the first customer that's going to have this integrated solution. They're already a customer of ours. We have well over 200 stores with Home Depot already deployed across multiple states. A number of those are here in California. And their business case is primarily meant to save on their electricity costs. They want to save on their operational costs so that they can have more customer service personnel in store from a strategic standpoint to enhance their overall store operations. So keeping that in mind, you have a retail customer here that has a really nice day and night cycle in terms of their electricity usage. So what are some of the things we can do with integrated storage? Well, first of all, we can do load shifting. So we can charge the battery at night, dispatch it during the day to shift peak energy charges. And then we can also do peak shaving based on an intelligent algorithm to actually shave their kilowatt demand charge. And finally, what's very cool about our technology compared to any other DER is being able to provide business continuity. If you have a Home Depot store in a storm, in a storm situation where the power is out everywhere, people need supplies and they want to come shop, you want to be able to open your store and operate. Well, with the integrated storage solution, we can actually support the vast majority of the load for the customer during one of those events. So that's another enhancement that storage brings to our solution as part of this value proposition. So I'm going to walk through how it actually works. So essentially, if you look at the load curve of a retail customer, essentially what we're doing is during the nighttime hours, we are charging the battery. And once the battery is charged during the nighttime, because there's very little load in the store, we can then discharge the battery coinciding with peak energy charges such that we're essentially eliminating almost all of their peak energy charges for the store. And then we have enough capacity in the battery to also go after the demand charge peak at the specific time. We can take all the 15-minute data, crunch it, then use an intelligent algorithm as to how the battery is dispatched. And then you simply continue charging the battery as you shift back into nighttime hours. Now, the devil's in the detail in terms of having the intelligence, looking at the seasonal data, et cetera, for these load curves. This is just a simplification of a load curve. You have to have daily load curves and then actually match your solution to it. You have to size your battery solution, size the Bloom solution, such that you can get this behavior in a consistent manner. But what you've essentially done is save them on almost all of their power costs. So what are some of the synergies here? Well, synergy-wise, we have no inverter costs. They're utilizing the same Bloom inverter. We make our own, some of the best in the world. Lower install cost. It's a single install versus 2 separate installs for the technologies. You're charging the battery with BE power, cheaper and cleaner than grid power, available 24/7. And you're providing highly efficient charging because you're using DC to DC versus AC to DC back to AC. You're going DC, DC, then back to AC in a single step. So you're getting all of those synergies. And then it comes back to the economics. Well, why do the economics work? Well, if you just take an example of a California tariff, you get the off-peak retail is typically around 8.7 cents in this tariff versus 15.4. If you're doing this only with a battery, you're getting an arbitrage of about 7 cents. If you're doing it with Bloom, we would normally, if we've already made the business case to the customer, typically what we're doing in the nighttime is we're net metering some of the power back to the grid. Now, the issue with fuel cells is that we get wholesale net energy metering. So if we got wholesale reimbursement for that extra power, we would only be getting about 5.8 cents. Now, if we take that same 5.8 cent power and instead of pushing it back to the grid, we push it to the batteries, we can now arbitrage it against the 15.4. So we create a far greater arbitrage opportunity combined with the cost synergies that I talked about to be able to dispatch the storage. Now, some of you may ask, well, why couldn't you do this with solar? And we get that question all the time, and we're deployed jointly with solar in a lot of different places. The reason you can't is for customers like ours who are multi-100 kilowatt customers, like 200 kilowatts and above, they don't have the roof space or essentially the ratio given the capacity factor of solar to actually have extra power. Plus the solar is producing power during peak times, so you'd rather discharge it during the peak rather than essentially put it in storage. So typically solar only impacts 10 to 15% of a load curve for the commercial customers we're serving versus we are impacting the load curve 60 to 80% of their total load curve. So that's a big difference in terms of the technology synergies that we have as well as the amount of load curve that we essentially serve for the customer. So that's the example of a retail store. We also have this concept that can be done at a much larger scale for a microgrid. So you may have heard of a low-profile campus being built in the South Bay these days. So we're really happy to report that I used to present this as a conceptual slide. It's become real, which is very exciting. We have 4 megawatts of Bloom at this campus, combined with multi-megawatt hours of batteries, and also 16 megawatts of solars. The coolest thing about this architecture is this is a large-scale, I would almost say, sort of medium voltage utility scale solution where you have the batteries and the Bloom solution on a large-scale DC bus with a utility-grade inverter, feeding a medium voltage loop for this entire campus. So what's the value proposition for all of that? Well, okay. So number one, they can island from the local grid and power the campus autonomously for extended durations. Number two, drive cost savings. With this level of generation and storage as well as solar, you can essentially do a lot of load following capability that you would never have the ability to do typically with all of these solutions in their own silos. And finally, you can provide and monetize ancillary services to the grid. We've talked about that earlier with the CAISO now opening up some programs. Well, with this amount of storage that can be utilized to provide frequency support or essentially capacity in that area of the grid, that should be able to get monetized. So very exciting, and that's the second sort of example of large-scale storage integration with fuel cells. The first example was more at a building scale. And essentially, this is just the beginning. We're seeing a convergence of DG technologies that allows a lot more flexibility. And there's cost synergies, there's features and savings that are driving end customer adoption. But most of all, what they really want is control and the ability to change as rates and other incentives change in markets to be able to adapt to that and providing that flexibility in a platform. And finally, this is not unique to commercial customers. As we scale these solutions, as we come down the cost curve, there's no reason you couldn't have done some of the stuff that I just described at a substation layer. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We got a couple minutes for questions here.
Sure.
I thought I'd bring up one that basically asking about the reliability of natural gas as a resource compared to electricity. Now, I know that a lot of places feel that it's more reliable than the grid, but is there do you guys have any thoughts about the applicability of natural gas fueled?
Sure.
In cases where the natural gas grid may be susceptible to outages as well?
So really, it's not susceptible to outages. It's a network system, and the DOE, it's so reliable that the DOE doesn't even keep reliability statistics on the natural gas grid. And also what you have to understand is the natural gas grid is not electrons. So essentially it's flows, there's storage in multiple spots and block valves, et cetera, such that it's very reliable. Just a quick example, there were 8 million people out during Hurricane Sandy. There was less than 60,000 gas customers who were out. And in that case, the gas was turned down because it was in flooded areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And by the way, how does this kind of all relate to Bloom's kind of current kind of LCOE when generating as kind of a baseload resource? And how do you see the addition of the storage functions, I take it the peak shaving, the load shifting and stuff, kind of adding or amending that?
Sure. So look, as rates get more focused on time of use to essentially pay more on peak and demand charges, What the storage essentially does is it allows us to have the flexibility to not only serve the base load of the customer, but also the peak load and the peak energy charges that they may face. So it actually makes our offering even more compelling. We can compete against the retail rates. We're present right now in 10 different states in the US. In each case, we're competing against the retail rate. Storage enhances that value proposition for us.
One other quick question, I think. Someone was asking where SoCo might deploy your stuff, and it's 5 states, but is the deal with really Power Secure, which operates in other parts, which is owned by Southern Company? Or?
Right, so Power Secure operates all over the country and behind the meter solutions. So we are utilizing that solution everywhere we go in terms of wherever storage makes sense based on the load curve.
Gotcha, gotcha. Excellent. By the way, is Bloom working mainly on distributed side or any utility scale solutions?
So we're beginning to look at the utility scale solutions as we're coming down the cost curve. There are actually multiple RFPs and other things going on in the country right now for that. We have the largest utility scale deployment in the country. We do have 30 megawatts in Delaware. And what's really cool is 27 megawatts are in high voltage transmission, but 3 megawatts are at a residential substation. So it's actually helping keep the neighborhood up.
Great. Well, Asim, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Vic Shao from behind the meter energy storage company Green Charge Networks is next. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Well, thanks guys for sticking with us today. It's getting near the end of the day, and I just found out there's no happy hour today either. So you guys are truly dedicated. Okay, so a little bit about Green Charge. So we deploy behind the meter battery storage systems for commercial industrial customers. We do a lot of school districts, a lot of hospitals, retailers, industrial sites, and the primary driver for our installations is really saving our customers money and reducing demand charges and bringing benefits for the C&I host. And our thought has always been that there's always a lot of talk about utility scale programs, that's how you're going to scale up in industry, is to get the utilities to buy a lot of battery storage or fuel cells or solar. But what we have learned over time is that we always get, we get the private sector involved, and we get our private sector customers driving the adoption and getting them, interested to deploy these kinds of new technology solutions.
I'll be far kinder than the
Eric, your mic's on.
Really, really.
Wow, where's that coming from? Eric, you want to join us up front?
All right.
Oh. Anyway, we have been doing this for a while. Our company is 8 years old. I am the founder and current CEO of the company. I guess in energy storage years, that makes me a dinosaur or something. So we have had systems, hundreds of them deployed, and in fact, some of them for as long as 5 years out in the industry. And we were acquired last year by ENGIE, one of the largest electricity providers in the world. So now, these days, we are really scaling up and going global and applying our storage solutions worldwide. Anyway, what's exciting? I didn't come here with a lot of slides. I can certainly go on and on about all the different projects that we're doing, but I wanted to highlight a particular set of projects that we're doing right now with PG&E, and this is truly exciting. This is truly exciting and innovative from my standpoint because in the program I'm going to get into here, it's called DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Management System, and it's a California EPIC-driven funded project, working with PG&E. And the idea is now that we do have a lot of customers, C&I customers deployed with the Green Charge energy storage systems, can we provide the utilities with some benefits as well from these assets? And is there a case, a business model where not only the C&I hosts, such as a large number of school districts, hospitals, retailers that we have deployed, not only can we provide benefits for them, but perhaps also for the utilities as well at certain times of the day and whatnot. So the program is called DERMS, and it's 6 sites spread out across 720 kilowatt hours. It's starting small, from our vernacular. This is a very small scale project now. Our average per system, per site deployment these days is north of 500 kilowatt hours. So 6 systems, 720. For us, this is a small project, but the application, I think, is very meaningful and impactful. And what we're doing essentially is putting in, and actually this is the first time this is publicly announced, so this is sort of exciting. Safeway is our existing customer, so we're adding some sites to our Safeway portfolio for this program. We're also launching a system at a Chuck E. Cheese, if you believe it, quick service restaurant. And finally,
those animatronic models take a lot of energy.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of French fries. And finally, a bunch more schools in the area. And the idea is that PG&E, what PG&E is buying is 4 hours a day in the months of July through September for these systems that we're deploying. And outside of that 4-hour window, even in those 3 months, they have the right to request, outside of these core hours that they're focused on, they have the right to request additional hours that we have to, discharge storage capacity, and we, as Green Charge, acting on behalf of our customers, we have the right to accept or reject, those bids from PG&E. But outside of those 3 months, hey, it's all for the systems that we're deploying. It's all for the benefit of our customers. And this program is a 2-year program, but we sign 10-year contracts, right, with our customers. So outside of the first couple of years of this trial, we get to serve our customers with these systems for many more years to come following that. So anyway, what are we trying to prove? Well, the proof that we're trying to create here is that deploying DERs in a distributed fashion and then aggregating them is a lower cost alternative for upgrading the distribution grid than it would be for beefing up a feeder line or beefing up the local substation or network transformers. And in fact, for this program, the DERMS program, that's exactly the setup at that San Jose geography. They have a couple of feeders that are somewhat stressed out. And so they're studying, instead of upgrading the feeders, is there another alternate solution that costs less? It costs less because part of the project financing, when this is up in scale, because it is for the host customer, well, the host customer ought to pay for some of it, right? And then PG&E is going to pay for some of it. And this idea of sharing these assets, public sector, private sector, is that going to be a lower cost alternative than building a new substation, right? That's the idea. That's what we're trying to test out. So the communication path is from PG&E's NOC over 2 hours, using SEP 2.0 communication protocol. So anyway, timelines. So the first couple of sites are going to go online in the month of April, next month, with a few more coming up over the summer. So the idea is that by the end of the summer, we will have 6 systems that's set up and running on the DERMS program. So Green Charge, our deployment model that we have been very successful at, is that we deploy a shared savings contract. We call it a Power Efficiency Agreement, PEA. And essentially what we say to our customers is that, hey, a lot of things are going to happen in energy storage. A lot of demand charge. That's something that we know of, but there could be opportunities like DERMS or demand response, DRAM. Any number of these programs are going to come in and out of during the next 10 years during the contract period. And what we'll do is we'll share in the upside. Whatever economic value we create, we will share with our customers. And it's not a lease, it's an off-balance sheet financing instrument, share savings instrument. Another way of saying that perhaps is that if the customer doesn't get any benefit out of the deployment, that they don't owe Green Charge a dime. So with this model, then we have been very, very successful in getting a lot of the customers that we have deployed at. But the reality is that programs like DERMS, DRAM, and so forth, they are really serving both sides of the meter, and we think this is a terrific new model for deploying energy storage in California and hopefully nationwide as well. So with that, I think I will end the slides portion of
All right.
talk.
Actually, you can even turn it back one if you want.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Vic. Appreciate it. Great. So yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left for questions, and I think one of the questions that popped up here is another one I thought of immediately. What happens when PG&E calls for the battery the same time that the host needs it for a demand charge reduction during those periods?
Well, in that particular example, the call would benefit both PG&E and the host, right? Because the host demand would naturally go down on the call, and helps everybody.
That does make sense, right? Because they're not measuring from the same spot.
Correct.
Essentially. Yeah. As a matter of fact, if I'm thinking this through, you guys, by reducing your demand charge at the same time that PG&E needs you to reduce demand to help avoid overloading a substation, you are in effect actually doing the thing that demand charges are supposed to do all the time, but only really at that point.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right.
That's very interesting. But and is this part of? I wonder, because DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Management System, indicates that maybe PG&E is piloting the software they have and then asking you guys to be the thing their software controls. Can you explain how PG&E's imperatives to do whatever it's doing with this DERMS projects match up with your capabilities on that front?
Yeah, so we are using an industry standard for the communication, right? So SCP 2.0. So it's cyber secured, it's a standard, and it allows us to work with the same standard with other utilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. And I guess I should do the flip side of that, when they ask at the same time question, ask, how do you guys manage the possibility that maybe demand charge mitigation and the PG&E needs for your system might not come at the same time at a different time, so that you might have some, you might not have enough charge to get through the entire thing?
Yeah, so because PG&E in this case is paying for the bulk of the project deployments, they reserve those 4-hour blocks in the summer, in those 3 summer months for their purposes. So they have the right to call that out. But however, and then if the batteries does get drained, then that does in fact leave the customer to, sorry, that's what you get when the customer, PG&E, takes those 4 hours right off the bat. However, on the positive side, outside of those 4 hours, PG&E has to make a request for additional discharges from the battery bank, and the customer in that case have the right to accept or reject that request from PG&E. And if it's a rich enough financial incentive from PG&E, then the customer will naturally accept that call. And then finally, outside of those 3 months, the rest of the 9 months, it is a customer's asset to use and for their purposes.
Right. Are those 6 locations being controlled independently? Well, I presume they are, but what are the use cases for aggregate control? I should preface that by saying I'm guessing that you can't do this without having at least enough of these things to make a difference to the substation. But can you talk about how the value to an individual customer becomes recognizable when you have enough customers in a place to put together enough load reduction at the end to satisfy the needs of a utility, say, avoiding a substation upgrade?
It is a pilot. It is a small-scale pilot, and so really though that the main proof point is along two primary feeders that these 6 systems are placed on. And so what PG&E is doing for measurement and verification is really measuring the load and the voltage drop along these 2 primary feeders that these systems are placed on.
I see. Does this substation actually need an asset upgrade that could be deferred? And have they figured out how many MW they'd need to actually make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, this pilot is not going to do a dent for that substation. But I think that the primary interest here is, number 1 is the feeders. Number 2, validating that assets, customer-sited assets, can be utilized by the utilities when the utilities really need it in the hot summer months.
Gotcha. And just a quick question for the uninitiated. How do you prove to site hosts that you are actually saving them money? That's a good question when you're preventing something from happening that would have cost them money, but they could argue that it might not have happened anyway.
Sure. Yeah, so we take MMV very seriously. What we do is we have 2 revenue grade meters, one at the main circuit breaker of the building, the other at the output of our system. And we take second by second data recordings of all those power numbers. And so after the fact, we can reconstruct exactly what happens during the month, although we've never had to go to that granularity, we have the data available. So in case the customer asks us, well, did you really reduce the demand? Well, we have historical data second by second that says that either we did or we didn't, and so we've been pretty successful with that approach.
Great. On that note, I think we are done with our case studies. But Nick, thank you very much. Asim Hussain, Nellie Tong, please join me in thanking our panelists and presenters.